Okay, I'm trying to stand over here. So.
Alright, mine's really not that interesting. Doing mine on prisonization because prison itself is kind of like a subculture, and because we have really high recidivism rates right now, and I'm actually doing a grant project for this in another class, so that's work for me. So that's what I'm doing it on because recidivism rates are so high. They're trying to figure out ways to like make people not want to come back to prison. It's the prisonization is like the process of like somebody like coming into prison and culture and like accepting it. It's kind of like losing their old life and coming into this one. It's the process of or taking away on integrated or less degrees of folk ways, mores, and customs, the general culture of the penitentiary, which is like the same thing of like you moving into like a new society, only it's forced upon them. Because prison or guarding the guards are able to keep the inmates protected, this causes prisonization to become more prevalent. My brother-in-law is actually a prison guard, and they're just shutting down like all our prisons and shoving all these really dangerous people into one small place. And it's getting harder and harder like to control them all. Many prisoners are becoming actually greater criminals when they're out. They actually people that are in there for a while will prey on people that are in there for short sentences and like use them for like gangs once they get out. It's kind of like their gateway into it. So what I'm going to do for my study, because this is what I'm going to run, is like the possible treatment programs in place that actually lower recidivism. But the problem is that a lot of prisoners don't want to go through the treatment programs. The ones that do actually usually end up not going back to prison. I think it's like 10% that go through the treatment program don't, which is actually a really high percentage. And if like we can cut recidivism rates down in the country by 10%, we save like $635 million a year, which is a lot for us. So what I want to do is like interview inmates when they arrive and before they leave to see if like their views, you know, if they want to change or not, have changed, or like if they came in, you know, ready to get out and start their life again, or if like they came in, became part of the gang within the prison and are ready to go out and start their life being like an informant for them. And then I kind of want to look at who's in the treatment programs and who's not, see how like their views differ, and then find like the most effective programs in place. And that's it. Short one. Okay.
Do you know anybody personally in prison?
I've known people that have been in prison, yeah. And he actually got in for he was just nice guy, wrong place, wrong time. But he was like one of the ones that could go into programs and like got a job making 85 cents an hour as like the librarian, which is like a job that everybody wants.
I don't know if you know about that or not, but isn't it true that they say the less guards are better? Have them, like, it's pointless to have more guards than inmates.
Sometimes, I mean, like, well, I mean, for the inmates that are higher ranking, I mean, I guess they would like that, but I mean, for the lower ranking guys that get preyed on a lot, it's kind of nice to have the guards there. So kind of, it goes either way.
Okay, another question. Do you feel that guards should have weapons like guns and stuff?
Guns, no, because prisoners, it would take a lot for them to be able to get like a deadly weapon in there. But I mean, like, I definitely see like the view for like mace and things like that, because if like a riot breaks out and it's 2 guards against 60 guys that have spent like the last 3 years of their lives working out, they're gonna need a little more than their fists to get past it.
Think about this. Then what if the inmates take the mace and stuff from the guards?
Well, actually, a lot of the rooms are equipped with mace, where somebody will be, because there's cameras everywhere, and they can just hit a button. And the guards in there. And actually, my brother-in-law was in the room. He couldn't get out quick enough, and they maced the whole room with him in it. So I mean, like, there's ways to get around. Like, it kind of can go either way, but.
So would your program, like the program, would it be for only certain people? Like
the one that I'm actually doing for another class, we actually had to create the entire program, like start to finish, and it was like you had to apply for it and like be chosen for it, because a lot of the prisons right now, just anybody can go in, and a lot of people just do it just to do it. So like, there's really no good. They really don't get any like, I guess, follow-up from it. They don't get any good like results from it. So like people that want to get better and want to do it, you know, because a lot of times they just will go in and they don't know what to do with their life outside of prison, so they just go back to being a criminal, and like kind of the process continues.
So it's up to you who will be able to go to the program.
Well, it would be probably like the non-violent offenders, just so like for the safety of others in the group.
Okay, but so you're telling me just because somebody got violent?
Well, I mean, if somebody killed somebody else, I mean, obviously I wouldn't like put, people with shorter sentences, that probably like are like drug or gang related with like, 3 to 5 years, because if somebody's going to be in prison for, a decade or so, I mean, there's really hard, you really can't go back from that. I mean, once you're in for a decade, it's going to be hard to like rehabilitate them for the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, you can, okay, question, you call somebody else.
What prisons in do you work just in Michigan?
Oh, the one that I'm going for is Ionia Prison, because it's a maximum security. It's like a level 5 where like all the serial killers go, like they don't even, like the hard time they get is in a cage outside alone all day. But then they have 2 level 2 houses, and it's just like 2 pole barns, and it's like 140 beds. So it's like for people that are like the non-violent ones that can be trusted, and they're just kind of like waiting out their sentence pretty much. That's like the ones that we would go for, the ones that can be like more trusted with the jobs and everything like that. Because we don't have work programs like southern prisons where you're handed a basket and told to go work in fields all day long. It's like they're kind of like rehabilitation.
Is there different recidivism rates based on security level of the prisons?
I haven't really looked into that, to be honest. I'm sure that there are like probably the higher ones. I would assume they would probably reoffend, because a lot of times like people just get so depressed and they get so hopeless once they're in there. Like once they're out, their family's already left them. They kind of like come back to nothing, so they don't really know what to do. And it's hard to get jobs and get the support to get jobs.
Have you heard of the work of justice?
Yeah.
Is your program like sort of like that, or?
I don't really remember. I never heard of it, but I don't really remember what it is.
It's basically like, say if you commit a crime, it's like a way for you to whoever you commit that crime to as a, like, give back to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like some inmates, they get teddy bears, like they make teddy bears and they get into churches. That's the way of them giving back. It's basically like giving back.
My program was like more of like a therapy thing, like identifying, like what it was is like you get in there and like it's like more of an intensive therapy of like what kind of preparing you for your stay in prison. Like this is how it's going to be. Like this is what's probably kind of, like mentally preparing them, and then they would split off into groups going on like why they were there. Like if you're a child offender or if like you're a drug addict, then it would kind of go into like and kind of like give them. It's pretty much be like a therapy session of like getting your life back. What are you going to do once you're out of prison? Like how are you going to not? What situations to avoid? Like how you're not going to let yourself fall back into those patterns.
Okay, that's almost like an AA back home.
Right.
Okay, last thing. So you say bring them home like for it, right? Like you tell them like what you're going to be, get to and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So you let a person that's going to be incarcerated know that like the likelihood that since you raped somebody, you're probably going to get beat. Like you'll tell them that type of stuff too.
Well, with my program, like being like applying for it, it's like a privilege for it. You have to like maintain a good record the whole time you're in there. Like if you like get into any trouble, you're out of the program, and you would actually be isolated because IONI has like already has like, those isolation spots. You would be away from the rest of the prison population. So like you also get safety like with that. So it's kind of like the incentive to stay with it.
Mm-hmm. Is this kind of something similar to like the NPRI or something you would see like working in conjunction with that, or like would this be like people separate who aren't in like a program like that, or?
Yeah, it would kind of be like separate. That's it.
Oh boy.
Donovan. You didn't request Donovan for the mixtape. I thought maybe you'd nominate your namesake.
No,
Quite
not a big
different.
fan of him actually.
Really?
Yeah, it's like the Michael Bolton thing from Office Space. Just kind of can't stand it.
I have to like the skinny fat out and that.
Not before, but I guess one person has now. I think right now people think I look like a werewolf is the current consensus.
I think you actually look like... Have you ever seen Rent?
Nope. I don't see many good things. I have too much homework for that.
Hey, Rent, don't...
No?
I'll you suck.
Alright. Anyway, this is my presentation. It's kind of out there a little bit. I guess the topic I was supposed to report on was the South, but I didn't really know where to go with that. So I play around with the idea a little bit, and I put a really boring article review in the middle of it to make it look professional, I guess. In the metaphysics, Aristotle said some stuff about the whole being more than the sum of its parts. He said that on a lot of pages, but that's all out of context. Philosophy, think about yourself, though, for pretty much the entirety of this presentation. Just think about yourself, what it means for yourself, who yourself is, where yourself is, and what self means as a word. Okay. Anthropologically speaking, also you can just keep thinking about yourself all throughout this. This is where it gets boring. In other cultures, self can take on different meanings. I believe one of the examples cited was a woman in some South American country who said that she got struck by lightning and was feeling sick because of it, but she didn't actually mean she was struck by lightning. She meant her pet was, because her pet was sort of an extension of herself. And sort of on that same token, cultures can experience specific sicknesses based on the culture. Ghost sickness was one specifically referenced. It refers to the American Indians had it, and it would cause them like fatigue or something. And we're not entirely sure where these cultural specific sicknesses come from, because there's not necessarily something physical causing it. And I guess this is an important note, that disease is something physical is causing it. It's like, oh, this is bad bacteria. Don't drink this. Don't eat this. It's all nasty. But like an illness can be sort of like a mental illness or something like that. There's not really a very apparent physical cause to it. So yeah, ghost sickness is a syndrome of something. It's difficult to describe to, I guess, North Americans, because we don't have almost any cultural bound illnesses, according to the Wikipedia page. So in order to explain it, you would sort of have to be a part of the culture. You wouldn't get the sickness generally from just everyday life. Like, there was a study in, did I cite the study? Yeah. There were some syndromes down in South America again, where they would just be affected from different circumstances, and they don't really, you wouldn't get it here. And I'm bad at public speaking. Yeah, but anyways, he did a study on some cultural syndromes, and he picked the places because of their tough economic conditions and whatnot. But generally, he just picked common families. He drew up maps, sectioned them into squares of the area, randomly chose 40, threw darts or something, and chose one family from each square. The interviewers were 2 Peruvian males. Basically, they went around and asked, have you had anyone in your family have like one of these cultural bound illnesses that are common to this area? And the females generally answered, like the mothers of the family were the ones who answered the health questions about the family. So that may have thrown some sort of a bias into it. The poorest towns had the higher cultural bound illnesses. The richer ones, not so much. It may be related to the fact that the poorer towns, generally people will die off a little bit sooner because they can't afford medicine and just conditions aren't all that great. He concluded that cultural bound illnesses follow generally the same pattern as other medically recognizable illnesses, not diseases, illnesses. He didn't include the interview questions in his review, though, which was bad. But he did provide way too much detail in everything else, which is good. Okay, now back to thinking about yourself. I sort of had to ask, what does self represent in today's world as a word and as a concept? In other cultures, self expands to include pets or other things valued. Anything you might consider to be an extension of yourself, like a cell phone that you just keep on you all the time, that you're really attached to, or a laptop. I actually, this is a personal one, is my parents, when I was born, they planted a tree, like roughly the same day I was born. And so I've always sort of felt attached to that tree and considered it almost an extension of myself, strangely. I think that's what the self is referred to in that aspect. Anyways, I'm going to play around with the mechanics and stuff of the self. So you don't have to participate, but you can think about participating if you want to. Just point to yourself. Now, see, that's interesting. That's also very interesting because that's not exactly what I expected from this study. But you'll find that out later. Okay. Now imagine you're the person to your left. Point to yourself.
I'm the person to my left. Oh,
Oh.
no. If I'm you.
I'm getting a lot of different results than I expected, which is good. So did our concept of self change when we pretended to be someone else, or just the word? Did the word self change? Did self still refer to you, or did it refer to someone else? Okay. Approximately. Okay. Imagine that through some marvel of science, your chest and torso are floating 5 feet to the right of you. Everything else is where it normally is. Point at yourself.
Wait.
There's still part of me, so I'm holding to that.
That's not interesting. Getting a lot of weird answers. I actually thought, when I was thinking about this, that a lot of people were just conditioned to point to their chests. So they would just automatically try to point to their chest and be a little bit confused about it. Because, okay, I'll go on about that later. Imagine your head is where it's right now, but the rest of your body is 5 feet apart. So just your head is where it is now. Everything else, that way. Point to yourself.
My arms over there, then point to my chest.
It gets complicated.
I can't point because that's so in my head.
And so this is one I thought was a little bit interesting too, because is our sense of self attached to our head? Granted, our brain is what makes us all individual. It's where our consciousness lies and everything. But we're still conditioned to point to our chest. So it's maybe that the word means more that it's attached to just sort of the central object rather than the actual individual. So self seems to be the object that I am rather than the individual. But that's more psychology and philosophy. Okay. And then one more. For some reason, your body is 5 feet to the left. Your head, your chest, your legs, everything. But like you can see, smell, taste, and like touch as if you were 5 feet, or where you are now. You can see your body to your left. But everything you see and stuff is where you are right now.
Okay, wait 1 second. Let's go back. You said you can see your body to the left, right? So that means your eyes are
Your eyes are with your body.
Then how can you see yourself? Right?
Magic.
Okay.
I'm playing around with the concept. Go with it. Okay. Now, I had a feeling that where we consider ourself to be is where our senses are attached. But generally, like, our self is a sense of who we are was also sort of attached to our senses. So I don't know what my conclusion is with it. I just wanted to play around with it for a little bit, see if people pointed to their chests like I thought or to somewhere completely different. Some people pointed like this, which I found really interesting. I was expecting a lot of just sort of general pointing central mass type thing. Here's some references for that study. And that's it. As I said, it was weird and out there. Oh man, there's questions. Okay.
Go back to the disease. What was the name of that disease that you said?
Ghost sickness.
Ghost sickness. So are you saying it's basically like, say that I have a best friend and my best friend will get real sick and I have to call the police or ambulance. I will call ambulance to tell them that I'm sick. Is that what they believe?
Ghost sickness is something a little bit detached from that. It's, if I believe I read the article on it right, it's you feel ill because I guess you've been around dead people or the grave of like a relative or someone has been disturbed a little bit.
No, it must be a cultural thing. If you said something about the dog, and you said like when the dog.
That one is just related to self. That one's not cultural bound illness.
Oh, okay. All right.
So with the self, so back to the lady said her dog got hurt. So in your case, if your tree got hurt, would you say that your self was hurt?
Yeah.
Don't trim it.
Okay.
Don't trim it.
Okay.
Hurt. It's the shears, man. Oh, true. Alright.
We do? You guys are gonna go?
I thought I saw your stuff on there. My phone number spells out 77 Girdwood, 774-473-9660. Kind of relates to something he said, and you'll see it in a minute. I'll just try to buzz through this because I have a real presentation for this week. But sampling is part of your final project, and so I do a whole week's lecture on sampling. And before I get into something that touched on what Donovan had in his presentation, I will just point out the fact that that is a legitimate study that you could do for this class. You could go to anywhere, Saginaw Valley, the mall, prison, and you could just go up to as many people as you could find and just say, point to yourself. And then they would, and then you would record if they pointed to their head, their chest, their back, or somewhere else. And that would be an actual study. Of course, try to make it a little bit more in depth than that. But those are the types of fun studies that you can be creatively thinking of. So I was glad that you brought that up because that'd be a fun study. You know? A lot of you are gonna, maybe you don't have such a creative mind, so you're thinking of going and asking people their heights, weights, and race, and income. Try to figure out if income is related to height or something like that. Well, maybe that's kind of fun. But asking someone to point to themselves, that's very unique. And I encourage you to bring something fresh to the table like that. Of course, you'd have to have some theory, hypothesis, and something behind it of substance. But sampling is essentially who you're studying. So we did the method, which is now 2 weeks ago, and that's how you're going to do this study. You can do qualitative or quantitative methods. If you're doing quantitative, it's statistical analysis most likely. If you're doing qualitative, you're probably doing an ethnography survey or an interview. So the method is how and what you're doing. The sample is who you're doing it to. The joke there is P. Diddy is the master of sampling with him and Notorious B.I.G. But the point on this slide is why sample, because you can't observe everything, which is actually going to be in my presentation from this week. They all flow together. Even the United States Census can't get a census to every single person in America. Who would the census miss most likely in America? Who does the census miss? The homeless people, right. And that is sort of a primary description of who the census misses. If you could go to a secondary description, what categorizes homeless people, or what's another descriptor of homeless people? So you can say the census misses homeless people, but homeless people are what? Poor. 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 They're poor, most likely. And so the census misses poor people. So when the census data comes back, it's probably going to miss a big chunk of poverty statistics, which the data collectors would have to estimate. So we can't get to every homeless person, so we have to get to as many as we can and then make some type of inference as to how many homeless people there are because we can't really see all of them. So we can't observe everything, so we need to do our best to retrieve a sample that is representative of the overall population that we're studying. What makes a good sample? It has to be representative of the population that you're studying in the way that the characteristics are similar. So if you're doing a study on people pointing to themselves and you want to analyze that based on race, and you're doing it at Saginaw Valley, if Saginaw Valley is made up of 20% African Americans, 30% Hispanics, and 50% Caucasians, then your sample, if you were doing it representative of SVSU, your sample would have to get as close to 20% African American, 30% Hispanic, and 50% Caucasian as you could. If you came back with a sample of SVSU, 90% African American, 5% Saudi Arabian, and 0% any other ethnicity, it would not be a representative sample. So if you were doing your study on race, though, and you didn't care about gender at all for your study, and Saginaw Valley is 50-50 male-female, and your sample came back 100% male, you could actually use that sample because the characteristics that you're studying in that situation would be race and not gender. And so gender wouldn't really necessarily be important to the representation of your sample to the population. Of course, ideally your sample is going to be extremely representative of your population, but if you can't make it perfect, you at least have to hit the categories that you are studying, okay? And there's some of our most common categories. Two approaches to sampling. There's probability sampling and non-probability sampling. I highlight convenience sampling because I think many of you would do convenience sampling. So I'll skip through some of these just to get to the ones that you'll most likely be doing. Probability sampling is when all elements have the same opportunity of being included in the sample. The U.S. Census is like this, I think, because not only do they mail it out, they also have people on the ground going out and looking for people to survey with the United States Census. So in theory, they can get to all the homeless people, and the homeless people are at shelters and this sort of thing. If you were doing a sample of SVSU, you might try to go to a class from every discipline, every program. You would try to go on a day, every day that we have class, and you would even sample the online students. So you would do something where everyone in the population has some opportunity of being included in the sample. And the mathematical probability that one of them is selected can be calculated. It doesn't necessarily have to be equal, but it can be calculated. Simple random sample is when everyone does have an equal chance of being selected. So it's kind of like the one before, but in the previous slide is where you could calculate the probability. In this slide, it is when every probability is equivalent. Simple random sample, if you were going to do a sample 200 participants of a population that had 2 million entries, your sample is represented by the lowercase n. And on this slide, your sample is 200. Lowercase n equals 200. Your population in this slide is 2 million. So that's represented by the capital N. And you're going to want to pay attention to some things in these slides because this is what you should have in your paper. You should use a small n. You should use a capital N. So I know that what you're talking about, and I understand that you have a good comprehension of the basics for this course. So the more detailed part of this slide is the way they get this simple random sample is, let's see, starting between 1 and population over sample, which is 20,000. You so you pick a number and then you take every 20,000th name. And this is an example of a systematic sampling technique. In other words, in this phone book, you wouldn't take the 200th name and the 350th name and the 777th name, which is pretty random. This is a calculated, systematic sampling where you would take every 20,000th name, and that would result in 200 total names, and they would be strategically, systematically sampled at every 20,000th interval. Okay, systematic approaches. There's another one up here. I won't go into that because it's basically restating the same thing, maybe with a little twist on it. This is another little twist of the same thing. You have a list of 10,000 people. You want a sample of 1,000. In this case, capital N is 10,000, lowercase n, 1,000. You divide the number of cases in the population by the desired sample size. So again, it's 10,000 divided by 1,000. And that gives you the value of 10. So you're going to take every 10th name or number or person or participant, and you're going to start with a random number instead of the first and the 20,000th entry and the 40,000th entry. You'll start with just a random number like 7 and do every 10th entry there, and that will give you 1,000 out of 10,000 entries. So your sample will be 1,000 if you take every 10th entry in the phone book or whatever this example is referring to. Cluster sampling, and this is the one that gets to Donovan's presentation. You said that he had picked a group from a county or another area, or threw darts at a map. Well, this is basic cluster sampling, where if you were going to cluster sample someplace, this appears to be New York. What you have here are segments. This is a house. I'm sorry, start here. A housing unit on a block on a city ward. I'm sorry, a home on a block on a ward on a county on a legislative district, for example, and a legislative district or senatorial district within a state. And so if you had one housing unit from each, depending on what cluster, how many you need to get in your sample. If there are 68 legislative units, then you would pick one home from each of the 68 legislative units if you wanted your sample to be small n equals 68. If there were 50,000 blocks in New York, you would take one housing unit from each of the, whatever I said, 50,000 blocks if you wanted your sample, lowercase n, to be 50,000. If there were 12 counties in New York, which I'm sure there are more than that, you'd take one house from each of the counties, and then your sample size would be 12 if there are 12 counties. So this would be cluster sampling, and that's what I heard coming across through your presentation. This is the one, though, that you'll probably use the most, a lot of people here. If you're doing a survey through Facebook or something, or if you're doing interviews for, even Ionia State Prison is kind of convenience sampling, because like you're not going to California prison, you're doing probably the most geographically nearby high security prison that you can get to, and that's very convenient. So if you're trying to make inferences and deduce some results for the entire nation, you know, ideally you'd want to get one prison from each state or something like that. So if your sample was prisons and not prisoners, it would be n equals 50. But you're doing like n equals 1 if prison was your unit of analysis. You're probably doing prisoners as your unit of analysis, but really you're only looking at one prison, and so that's pretty convenient. So you'd probably consider that convenient sampling. And there's no trick or mystery to the terminology there. Convenient sampling is like literally just convenient sampling, and most often that's when people distribute a survey in this class, which I'm surprised I haven't seen, because I usually see a survey or 2 or 3 or 6 in every class. I haven't surveyed anybody. Yeah, but convenience sampling would be like a survey of this class, a survey of your Facebook friends, or going to the mall and doing some type of participant observation, which I've already had a student do that in my Delta College class. Did a participant observation at the mall, has already submitted her final paper, and got a good grade on it. So she can resubmit, get a better grade. But I thought that was pretty cool to do a convenience sampling participant observation at the mall. It was a good study and well-written paper. I don't think I have this on the slides, but I'm going to mention with convenience sampling, especially with Facebook. Go back. If you do Facebook, if you submit a survey or you distribute a survey to all of your Facebook friends, and you have 30 Facebook friends, then that would be a convenience sampling to your Facebook friends. But if you encourage your Facebook friends to give the survey to their friends, and then they give it to their friends, the terminology there is called snowball sampling. And this was not just restricted to Facebook, but if you interview, or it wouldn't be really interview, but if you, I do this actually a lot in my research on sports. I'll reach out to an athlete and I'll say, you know, can I interview you? And then I'll say, well, do you know any other athletes that play basketball in Flint that play internationally? And they say, yeah, you should talk to these 5 guys. And then when I interview them, they say, yeah, you should talk to these other 6 guys. That's a snowball sample. So again, a lot of you here will be using convenience sampling and also snowball sampling. And I think not only are those pretty easy ones to do, but I think the terminology is pretty easy to remember, because convenience sampling is literally convenient sampling, and snowball sampling, I think you have the idea of the snowball, just accumulating more respondents. This is just a way to look at a sample and try to figure out the validity, because when I'm grading your papers and when I'm looking at your papers, this is the kind of thing that I'm going to be looking at in your sample section, which should be about 2/3 of a page. You should make it 2/3 of a page of quality, not just, hey, this is my sample. But you have to have a good sample that's representative of what the population is that you want to study. In this case, they did a study of 27,000 readers of Time magazine and asked them about problems at work. And, you know, is this a good sample? Well, if it's representative of, if they're doing a study of Time magazine readers, then that would be a good sample. But if they're doing a study about, you know, all of American workers, and they went at the Time magazine readers, first of all, they're assuming literacy. Not everyone in America is literate. They're assuming some interests with Time and the news, and maybe Time magazine readers are of higher educational achievement bracket than most Americans. So that's also slanted as well. So this wouldn't be representative of America, and I would have little confidence in this sample. So if you're doing a Facebook survey or passing out a survey to this class, then perhaps your population would be freshman entry-level sociology students or something like that. But if you said that this class was representative of, I don't know, something that it's not, like postdoctorate students, then, you know, you would get a bad grade on your paper. But that's really blatant way of saying that I think some of you might slip up if you don't pay really close attention to the validity and confidence of your sample.
Say if you're doing, that's I have to do my paper. So we just do hypotheticals for example.
Most definitely. And if you're doing like if you were going to do a study and you're saying Ionia Prison because you think that's the only one that you can get to, but you're not going to get there, maybe you could, you know, change that up and say that you really did want to go to 50 prisons of one of all 50 states. You know, in a proposal, you say what you really think is going to get the best data for your study. You propose what would be the best study. So yeah, that's a good point. Especially, I will look a little bit closer at those proposals and say, like, you know, you're proposing a survey to 20 students at Saginaw Valley. Like, how is that going to represent anything but that class or something like that? If you're doing a proposal, you really need to have a good sample section, because you need to propose the best sample for the population that you're studying. And the best sample is not everybody in the world. That's not realistic. Because in the limitations section, that's when you talk about why you're doing that sample. And maybe you only propose Ionia because you don't think that you have any access to time and money and resources and even access itself to get to other prisons. But yeah, if you're doing a proposal, I mean, give me something good, you know. What's your study going to be on?
It's going to be on Asian population. So
Oh yeah.
it's gonna. I'm trying to pose a question and say, why is this trend happening? And I'll probably take a sample of that. How young people feel about it, feel what's going on in culture, because they're essentially, there's a lot less young people than there are old people. Old people make around 35% of the population. So
If you're doing a smaller geographically bound area like that and population like that, I would encourage cluster sampling too. You know, like look at the map and just say, and I don't know how Japan is divided up, but if they had counties or regions, you know, so I'm gonna get, you know, 25 people from each region, and of those 25 people, 5 are gonna be elderly, 5 are gonna be young, and however many else I said in the middle. Cluster sampling would be good.
If you're doing a study on, like, that's kind of really generalized in respect to, like, linguistics in relation to children and what factors contribute to their development, and you're trying to concentrate on one thing in their environment, and your proposal is applied to, like, just like the state of Michigan, and you say clearly in your recommendations that, you know, it would be better if it was applied as a whole, like throughout the United States or as the world as a whole. Like, would that be okay as long as?
Yeah, that would definitely be okay, and I like how you said that. I didn't like how you started, but then you finished it well because sometimes in the rest of the class should hear this, that sometimes papers will convey this, like you started there to say, I'm doing a study on children in the world today, you know, like, and I'll be like, okay, and they'll be like, I'm going to get some children in my sample of various races, and they don't even say the geographic location. And I'm like, what children? Are you talking about Japanese children? Like, are you talking about children from the 1930s? Because you haven't even told me a time frame. Are you doing a longitudinal study? Like, they have no concrete definition of what children they're looking at. So if you're looking at current Michigan children to represent America, that's a sort of a great explanation of your sample and your population. Now, stretching it to global, though, you might want to be careful because unless you're doing...
Well, I basically just stated that with how many like other factors could be contributing like to their development, that multiple studies obviously need to be done to make this more substantial as far as what makes them develop it the best.
Yeah, if you, because when you say it has broader implications on the world, internationally, globally, I mean, you always have to remember that there's kids in the bush in Africa, and there's like Eskimos up in...
I think it was more in relation to the United States, but I just did the study of 20 families with participant observation and some other like methods used, and it was basically just 20 families. Half of them were from urban and other areas of the, like, I tried to get it a little bit out there, and then with the races too.
And that's a good, that's further a good description, because if you are defining your sample as urban, then you can talk about it representing urban other locations. And then if you're talking about global implications, you can say, I think this has global implications for other urban areas, because you define your sample as urban, then that urban can be applied to a variety of different countries. But yeah, that's even better, because like I said, if you start with the whole, like, I'm doing children, and then you try to say, and these children are representative of those children. No, they're not.
I felt like I was pretty, like, that was the one thing I thought that was kind of bad about my paper, is I felt like I was being kind of repetitive a little bit, because I had all these details in regards to my study and what I wanted to do in that, but when it got to like my results section, since it was a proposal, I didn't have like all of these like stats or anything to give out. So
yeah, that's understandable. So you'll just have a little bit bulkier of a limitation section, and maybe a little bit extra in your lit
that's
review.
actually what happened. I had like a little over a page on limitations and only like half a page on results.
Because a proposal will be tough to get expected results and data. But for somebody that actually does a participant observation, I think they're going to be geeked to actually put their data and results on paper, so their data and results section might be longer. But it's all, yeah, it's definitely proportional. It can vary quite a bit. So good questions.
They're so high. They're trying to figure out ways to like make people not want to come back to prison. It's the prisonization is like the process of like somebody like coming into prison and culture and like accepting it. It's kind of like losing their old life and coming into this one. It's the process of, or taking away on integrated or less degrees of folk ways, mores, and customs, the general culture of the penitentiary, which is like the same thing of like you moving into like a new society, only it's forced upon them. Because prison or guarding the guards are able to keep the inmates protected, this causes prisonization to become more prevalent. My brother-in-law is actually a prison guard, and they're just shutting down like all our prisons and shoving all these really dangerous people into one small place. And it's getting harder and harder like to control them all. Many prisoners are becoming actually greater criminals when they're out. They actually, people that are in there for a while will prey on people that are in there for short sentences and like use them for like gangs once they get out. It's kind of like their gateway into it. So what I'm going to do for my study, because this is what I'm going to run, is like the nice guy, wrong place, wrong time. But he was like one of the ones that could go into programs and like got a job making 85 cents an hour as like the librarian, which is like a job that everybody wants.
I don't know if you know about that or not, but isn't it true that they say the nest guards are better than have them like it's pointless to have more guards than inmates.
Sometimes, I mean, like, well, I mean, for the inmates that are higher ranking, I mean, I guess they would like that, but I mean, for the lower ranking guys that get preyed on a lot, it's kind of nice to have the guards there. So kind of, it goes either way.
Okay, another question. Do you feel that guards should have weapons like guns and stuff?
Guns, no, because prisoners, it would take a lot for them to be able to get like a deadly weapon in there. But I mean, like, I definitely see like the view for like mace and things like that, because if like a riot breaks out and it's 2 guards against 60 guys that have spent like the last 3 years of their lives working out, they're gonna need a little more than their fists to get past it.
Okay, think about this. Then what if the inmates take the mace and stuff from the guards?
Well, actually, a lot of the rooms are equipped with mace, where somebody will be, because there's cameras everywhere, and they can just hit a button, and the guards in there. And actually, my brother-in-law was in the room. He couldn't get out quick enough, and they maced the whole room with him in it. So I mean, like, there's ways to get around. Like, it kind of can go either way, but.
So would your program, like I guess probably
Yeah.
program, would it be for only certain people? Like
The one that I'm actually doing for another class, we actually had to create the entire program, like start to finish. And it was like you had to apply for it and like be chosen for it, because a lot of the prisons right now, just anybody can go in, and a lot of people just do it just to do it. So like there's really no good, they really don't get any like, I guess, follow-up from it. They don't get any good like results from it. So like people that want to get better and want to do it, you know, because a lot of times they just will go in and they don't know what to do with their life outside of prison, so they just go back to being a criminal, and like kind of the process
so
continues.
it's up to you who would be able to go to the program.
Well, it would be probably like the non-violent offenders, just to, like, for the safety of others in the group.
Okay, but
Possible treatment programs in place that actually lower recidivism, but the problem is that a lot of prisoners don't want to go through the treatment programs. The ones that do actually usually end up not going back to prison. I think it's like 10% that go through the treatment program don't, which is actually a really high percentage. And if like we can cut recidivism rates down in the country by 10%, we save like $635 million a year, which is a lot for us. So what I want to do is like interview inmates when they arrive and before they leave to see if like their views you know, if they want to change or not have changed, or like if they came in, you know, ready to get out and start their life again, or if like they came in, became part of the gang within the prison and are ready to go out and start their life being like an informant for them. And then I kind of want to look at who's in the treatment programs and who's not, see how like their views differ, and then find like the most effective programs in place. And that's it. Short one. Okay.
Do you know anybody personally in prison?
I've known people that have been in prison, yeah. And he actually got in for just, he was just.
Okay, I'm trying to stand over here. So.
All right, mine's really not that interesting. I'm doing mine on prisonization because prison itself is kind of like a subculture, and because we have really high recidivism rates right now, I'm actually doing a grant project for this in another class, so that's work for me. So this is what I'm doing it on, because recidivism rates